Well, Pam, which way you going? Left or right?
Right.
That's too bad.
Why?
Well, because it was a 50-50 shot on whether you'd be going left or right. You see, we're both going left. You could have just as easily been going left, too, and if that was the case, it would have been a while before you started getting scared. But since you're going the other way, I'm afraid you're gonna have to start getting scared immediately.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
I just can't take no pleasure in killing nothing. Just some things you gotta do. Death has come to your little town, Sheriff.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Who's laughing now? Be one of us. Join us! Join us! Join us! Join us! Well, we'll just wait here for a little while. See what happens.
Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters, and welcome back to SplatterCast. I'm Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And yes, today we are on another Luke pick. We are discussing a movie that is pretty formative to us, actually. If you didn't catch our interview with Super No Bueno, I don't know if we discussed it much. But this was kind of the thing that sparked it all. What started our little friendship here, and then inevitably led us down the path of many podcasts, and now to the current day formation of what you guys are currently watching, SplatterCast. So, Luke, why don't you take us on those fortuitous events? Explain that little story to the good folks at home of why today's film is so important to us.
Yes, very near and dear to our hearts. And this being my last pick of 2022, and
That's
obviously
right.
this is the reincarnation of Splattercast, a continuation from a few years ago, and we are still going strong. We are sticking with it. So I feel like we had to pick a film to kind of commemorate this this I don't know how we would say this, a monumental moment maybe. So Christine here, yes. So we did talk about this when we were interviewed, as Dylan said, by Super No Bueno, and we just mentioned it a little bit. So I thought it was a very interesting pick to choose. I mean, it's something we both love talking about. So I thought we'd have some interesting conversation. But yes, this did start it all. I think we've mentioned it a few times here on the podcast, never really dove too deep into it, but me and Dylan did cross paths initially at a used media store locally. I was already working there for a couple of years, and then Dylan put in the application and was selected to start working there as well. Obviously, it was due to his wealth of movie knowledge. So me and him never really had, I mean, we would talk, but, it was just kind of more so casual stuff, I would say. I think that's pretty correct. Certain movies would come in, we'd have a little bit of a discussion about it. And then finally one day, John Carpenter's Christine popped on into our place of business, and we're able to kind of put those things on hold. We were supposed to have a 7-day waiting period, but hey, that place doesn't exist anymore. We didn't wait that long.
Nope.
Usually if something came in and it interested whoever was working, they would snag it right then and then put it on the back counter for those 7 days before we could purchase it. And that did happen. I don't think I bought it in, actually. I think I may have found it out on the shelf. But I know I had to wait 7 days because I was sitting back there. It was John Carpenter's Christine, spoiler. And it was sitting back there, and Dylan noticed it. And I think at that point you did not know John Carpenter had directed the film, actually.
No, I didn't. So Christine lived in infamy for me because of my family. So it was one of those things where Christine was a movie just like Carrie that got talked about a lot from my relatives, specifically like my aunts and uncles, and my mom and my dad would mention those movies quite a lot. Being rather big Stephen King fans themselves, I think most everybody was around that time that they were growing up. So this was a movie that they always had kind things to say about. And so it was one of those ones where I believe I had seen it on television in Georgia one time. And I really enjoyed it from what I remembered, but it had been a long, long time. But before that, at that time, I was still pretty young. So John Carpenter wasn't necessarily a name that like could say was synonymous with all of these horror films. The only one that I actually really associated with him was, of course, Halloween. So it's one of those things where it's like I'd already seen The Thing by that point and really loved that. Honestly, The Thing didn't even become my favorite horror film until I'd seen it years before, and then it didn't become my favorite horror film until I revisited it a few years later and got to watch it. So it's one of those things where it's like John Carpenter had kind of been something of this figure in my life way beforehand with things like that and Big Trouble Little China, stuff like that I had seen, but I just never really knew that was his work. And
Yeah.
Christine was a prime example of that.
Yeah, and this is one where even if you're diving down the rabbit hole of John Carpenter and you're really trying to knock off his filmography, you tend to start with a lot of the heavier hitters
Mm-hmm.
before you get to Christine. I mean, obviously, we both love Christine here, but his filmography is so strong that this one kind of falls, not necessarily, I would say, probably in that first initial lineup of things you're going to cross off your John Carpenter list, because there are things like Halloween, They Live, Big Trouble in Little China. There's just so much there that this one falls maybe more so in the middle of trying to cross off all his most notable films. So like this one kind of falls by the wayside a little bit. For me, this one was on AMC a lot growing up, so I would catch it. My dad was a huge Stephen King fan, so obviously anytime a Stephen King property showed up on television, we would stick with it. That's how I became traumatized with it. So it's like all these things. Anytime there was a Stephen King property on TV, we would watch it in its entirety. So I had seen Christine a handful of times, just growing up and being around it. So it was like, you could pick out that Plymouth Fury anywhere for me because, it's just one of those things that kind of sticks in your head. But this wasn't one of those films. I would see it maybe a couple times a year, and that's being generous. I probably only actually did see it a handful of times because this wasn't a common film that they would show on television a lot. This wasn't something that was continuously played like, every Halloween or anything like that. This was one of
No,
those
this was
random.
never played around Halloween. I don't remember this being on Fear Fest hardly at all. And if it was, it wasn't one of those like midday kind of features that they'd show. Cause like this would probably show up towards the back half, like after I'd gone to bed by like 11 o'clock at night, if it premiered at all.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It's not like one of his more well-known Carpenter films, but I mean, it's damn good. And we'll get into that a little
Absolutely.
bit. But to kind of wrap things up with the story here of how we met, I know we just got to the point where I actually noticed the Blu-ray. So then if you want to
Yeah.
take us there. So
Yeah, so that was pretty much our conversation point where it was like, you said John Carpenter directed this, and then as soon as, you had saw it back then, it was a John Carpenter film, you instantly had eyes for it. And I think that's really what spawned pretty much our conversation at that point of John Carpenter, and that's really where we started diving down the rabbit hole of just horror in general. So it was kind of like, and then we've talked about this on the podcast where we head by admission only. It was one of those things. I think it was a short time after that where
mhm.
I kind of had mentioned to you I had an idea for a podcast. It was called By Admission Only, and it inquired if you were at all interested in actually, doing that almost a weekly commitment or bi-weekly. I can't remember what we started with,
I think
but
we said we were going to do a bi-monthly
okay.
at
So
first, and then it turned into bi-weekly because we were having
okay, yeah.
fun.
We started kind of getting that ball rolling. It became a regular thing. So we had that podcast going for on and off for a few years, and then you suggested SplatterCast, and we got that going during the pandemic, and then we get busy again and we take a break, and then we just reignited SplatterCast, and we're still going strong. So,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
I think this is, as we always like to state, this iteration isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
correct.
We've invested far too much into this now to, I think, pull back like we used to. Because before, it was like we didn't work on advertising or really getting our following up. It was just kind of something we would put up and just kind of say, hey, it does what it does. You
Yeah.
would tell me the analytics every once in a while from our little podcast hub, and that was the end of it, really. So it's like, this is kind of our first real, hey, let's take this, let's fucking run with it, let's do it. And like we always say, with the pandemic happening, and now programs like StreamYard making it a lot easier for us. Still a ton of work, but I mean, like, at the end of the day, we can do this now. We can actually do this more consistently, and I hope
Yeah.
that we have been. I can say now, when this premieres, as of recording this, we just crossed 500 subscribers, which is super humbling to us. We've never had anything reach this kind of a height before. So this is really, really great, really fun stuff for us. So
And again,
definitely
how
love it.
fitting is it that we cover Christine as we finally hit the landmark we've been striving for. Well, and not since the beginning, but we initially just wanted to get to that 100 point, and then we crossed it, and then we just kept going. So, Sunday Scaries, we were like, man, hopefully by the end of the year we get to that 500 point, and we did it today before we got a chance to record this. So I mean,
Mhm.
again, very fitting for us. I think this is full circle so far. So we hit Christine here, and then on to even bigger things for 2023.
Absolutely. And a little known actual thing that I think this is something that sticks out of my mind, and then we'll start diving into, more Christine talk. But because this is such a seminal film for us, and Carpenter is just one of those directors that for both Luke and I means so much. It was actually you bought because we had that dollar section. Was it a dollar section, or was it like a buy? It was like a buy three, get one free or
Yes.
something
Yep, that's what it
section.
was. Yep.
Okay. So it was like, yeah, we had that. The fog ended up in there for some reason. I think our manager at the time didn't really know what it was, but it was John Carpenter's version of the fog ended up in there, and you had bought it. Because I had seen that it was in there at the beginning of that shift, and I was thinking about it. But me, being so young and not being the best with my money, I didn't have anything to get it, even enough to spare for that at the time. So I remember you picked it up, and then you let me borrow it that day, and that was the first time I'd ever seen the fog. And a little, if you don't know, if you kind of been with us, if you go to the Spotify page or wherever other pages where our podcasts are posted, if you go to like the archived episodes, which are like those first few we did in the pandemic,
Yep.
the fog is one of those episodes.
Yes. So is this, now that I'm thinking about it, what other John Carpenter ones have we done? We've done this now, The Fog. Have we done any other Carpenter stuff?
Not on the formal podcast. I mean, on the channel, of course, we just had our Halloween stuff where we talked
Yeah.
the original, but I mean, like, those are more supplemental, more
Yeah.
fun, more edited kind of videos. But no, I think we've been we've been saving Carpenter quite a
Yeah.
bit. So this is another notch down there, and I promise we'll get there. Obviously the Thing pops up in my brain every time it becomes one of my picks. But I just don't know. I feel like I'm kind of saving that one.
Yeah.
Maybe as we get into the dead of winter, because I always watch that when it gets super cold out, just because it's very fitting. So it's like maybe this year we'll get to that, but I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Because I mean, that's that would be like covering American Werewolf in London or Silver
Yeah.
Bullet for us. That's a big one for both of
Yeah.
us. So it's
But
like that.
we did cover that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that did so well.
I
So
know. Yeah, and
um
that was a big one for us too. So it's like we don't have a lot of the classics, but I mean that's kind of the the intent of this. We're trying not to knock down the heavy hitters so quickly.
yeah.
Like we could do that, But then, 2 years from now, it's like, well, fuck, we've talked about every Evil Dead, we've talked about every Halloween, that kind of thing. And we're trying to kind of vary it up a little bit. I want to get some of these deep dives, with things like Abominable and Bubba Hotep and stuff like that doesn't just get really talked about that much. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah.
And as we're talking about Carpenter and penciling in 2023, I will say we will be touching on Carpenter definitely on 2023 at some point. I don't know what month, but there's going to be some subject matter that we haven't penciled in, certainly. So this will not be the last time.
Oh, no. He'll be talked about. I'm sure the thing about this is, like, as we go along with this podcast, I am so sure that, like, this might not even be the last time we cover Christine.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
It's just one of those things where we love these movies so much that, like, 3 or 4 years from now, we could come back to this and we could talk again, because, like, that's the beauty of the genre, and that's the beauty of movies like this, where it's like, even this viewing, I got more out of this than I did my first viewing or my reviewing a couple years ago. And it's one of those things where it's just like, that's the beauty of this. So, nothing is completely dead or off the table ever.
Yeah.
So,
because even like this, I know, like I said, I've watched this regularly. Not every year, but it's something that's always on my watch list if I'm trying to kill time or something. And it's like, well, I haven't seen Christine in a minute, but like even saying, okay, we're doing this for the podcast, sitting down and really watching this thing. And we're not going to be here for 3 hours. But it's like one of those, you could pick the first 20 minutes of this film and dissect it scene by scene, and then do another 20 minutes of this, because this film is so well done. From a character perspective, from a tension standpoint, just from the aesthetic alone, so well done. This is a complete film. This is like one of those ones where, yes, when we talk about John Carpenter, it probably falls maybe in the middle, just because there are so many great films. And that's just because, and when I say that I'm talking about when it comes to mind of John Carpenter films. Christine's probably at that later half, just because you don't think of it right away. But like when you look at this film, in talking with people and like looking up ratings and things for this film, it's not divisive. Everyone says this is such a strong film, and the consensus seems to be this is slightly overlooked, and I think everyone's in agreement with that, because this is such a well done film, even taking from the source material and making it your own. Absolutely well done.
Yeah, and I agree with you that this is one of those ones that you don't hear about much. But what's even more impressive about this film is that it is, and I think why its level of quality is so strong, is because it is a beautiful melding of the minds, from the writing and the cinematic presentation of both John Carpenter, but we cannot forget that this is based off of the works of Stephen King.
Yes.
So it's like, and he is the master of horror as is. And, I don't think we've covered a Stephen King movie specifically yet. No, we haven't. But we did talk about, of course, Silver Bullet, when we did our Werewolves Not Swearwolves inaugural episode thing. So it's like one of those things where Stephen King is a huge influence to both of us. We love him, and his writing, and it affects our writing. Like, this is kind of, if you want to put it in perspective, how I think the quality that you get here is kind of that quality that you and I strive for when it comes to writing some of our works.
Yeah.
You want the visuals, you want the eye of John Carpenter with the strength and the writing and the characters of Stephen King.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a really great way to sum up how you and I work together when it comes to writing our own films. Like, I can think of a couple of scripts, 2 that come to mind, one a series, one a film, that there's easily, like, the influence of both those gentlemen throughout. And
Absolutely.
it's like, one of them very much Halloween 3 inspired, but still written and produced by John Carpenter. So it's one of those things where it's like, you don't get lightning in a bottle like this again, which is so strange to me. And it seemed like this worked so well. And this was such a positive, spin. I don't know how it did box office wise. We'll get into that. But it was one of those things where it's like, I don't understand how these two didn't continue to work together.
Yeah. Especially, when you look at something like Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick, where there was so much tension there, so much hatred in a sense, where, Stephen King was not happy with how that turned out. And from that source material. And then you kind of look at Christine, and where I talk about there were some alterations made from the novel to the film, and, but how those characters were brought to life, and, just the portrayal in general, it seemed like everyone was happy here. Like diving into the way John Carpenter felt about this, absolutely a positive experience on his end. I haven't heard Stephen King say anything bad about the movie Christine, so it's like it seemed like everyone was really happy with the way this turned out, and like this is something you wish you could bottle whatever makes Stephen King, and whatever makes John Carpenter, and just be able to sell that, because like this is a partnership that works. It is very surprising that we never got anything down the road, especially maybe in the 90s when like even more Stephen King things were, really hitting like TV and stuff like that. So I'm very surprised that we didn't see another partnership here, because this one just worked absolutely so well.
And, I think that although I love him, I could probably put a little bit more of that on Carpenter's shoulders. Because, it's no secret that Carpenter, he was pretty beaten down by the studio system by this point. By this point in his career, I think this was definitely post. Let me see. This was post The Thing. Okay,
Yes.
This came out right after The Thing.
Yep.
The next year. So it's kind of like, to him, this probably was more of a rebound project, because
It absolutely
The
was.
Thing, he put so much into that. He literally like says and states that is his finest work, and I agree. I think that, for a man who's, contributed such things as Escape from New York, The Fog, Halloween, I could go through his entire filmography, and every single one of these to an extent is a banger. And it's one of those things where it's like he just got so worn down by the studio for that one, because they botched it. The Thing was botched because the studios didn't like it. They didn't know how to market it. And it wasn't a film that till later on started to get its legs. And now people hail it as an all-time classic. It's easily one of the top 5 greatest horror films of all time if you talk to most people. So it's like one of those things where it's like he comes off of that into Christine, and then Starman, where he's really changing up the formula, really trying to set himself apart. So it's like I feel like to an extent that was on purpose, because he was just like kind of just trying to, he might have been stuck in this way of just trying to please the studios or get a box office hit, because he didn't want to be known as a failure. Because, it's like, that's the thing. Like, as a filmmaker or creative in general, imposter syndrome is a killer.
Yeah.
Like, it will ruin you, because it's like you sit there and like, just because one thing didn't work out, we're talking about a guy who has already produced these absolute classics with like Halloween. If he just would have made Halloween and called it a day, he'd still go down as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And like that's the kind of level that he's thinking of here. But the fact that The Thing was such a passion project for him, that it broke him that hard, I think that I gotta put it on him that's probably why there wasn't another kind of rekindling of the pair, because he was so dead set for so long on just trying anything he could to kind of shake that stigma. And then by the time it came around, he was done. He was out of it. He didn't want to be making films anymore. He didn't want to be in the studio system.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't want to say that outright, I guess, because like I love the man. I look up to him greatly. Obviously we don't know what it was. It could have just been a timing thing. But yeah, I think that, if clearer heads prevailed and The Thing wasn't as lambasted as it was, I do think there's a future or a multiverse scenario where we would have gotten a couple more King Carpenter adaptations.
Yeah, and I think that's what surprises me, because this may be bleeding a little bit into her production notes, but Carpenter did say that he was working initially when this project was brought to him, and which we'll eventually get a little more into. he was busy with another Stephen King project, actually, that fell through.
Firestarter.
Yes. And that fell through. So this came back on his lap, and he picked it up because he was actually out of work after, the critical bomb that the thing was. So he did say he looked at this as a job. He said, "Hey, I was out of work. Why not do something like this?" This wasn't a passion project for him. He just needed something, to fill the time since Firestarter had fallen through. And he was kind of getting that stigma as the horror guy. They said the thing was a little too violent. And that's the kind of reputation that he was getting. So he was actually a little more mindful when looking at Christine to kind of pull back on the violence. And this was like one of those things where, I was kind of like looking up the statistics of it. And it was like, the thing had, I think, like 12 kills in it overall, whereas Christine had 7. And I know I did not get a chance to actually read the source material. The book is just, it was too long to try and fit into the span of what we're doing here. But I did look up that there are some more kills actually in Christine that they omitted more so. And they wanted that rated R, but it was kind of, they had to actually up the foul language because it wasn't based more so on the kills. It was they were kind of dreaded. It was almost they were dreading getting the PG rating. So they wanted to get that R, so they hopped up the foul language in the film, and that's what acquired him the R. It wasn't the violence. So Carpenter was very mindful here. And then kind of going into the partnership that we were talking about, that's kind of what surprises me because, he did jump into Starman, and then you look at the rest of his filmography where I think he was trying to shake that I'm the horror guy and for a little bit, but then I think eventually he leaned a little more into it. But then we look at his filmography in the 90s, and it's a little more scarce than the 80s were, where it's like he seemed to have every other project. So it surprised me that they did not re-up this partnership in the 90s where, Stephen King was getting a lot of his properties made for TV. There were films. There was, kind of made for TV movies, and there were the actual films themselves. It surprised me that Carpenter didn't pencil in another Stephen King project in the 90s just because it did seem like the schedules would have lined up a little better, but,
Mhm.
It wasn't meant to be, I suppose.
Yeah, and we talk about that, and the thing about it too, I think that's interesting, and that I kind of got out of this, and I know I'll save a little bit more of this conversation for our first segment, but like this film is rooted in kind of the 1950s era kind of feel. I mean, like it takes place in modern day at that point, which was what, 87, or no, was that 83? 83.
Yeah, this was a 1983 film. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's taking place in 83, but obviously with the kind of style that Arnie portrays, and just the Plymouth Fury itself being a 1950s car.
Well, yeah, sorry, correction. Sorry. The film was made in 1983. It's 1978 in the actual film itself.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right, but still, point still stands.
No,
that
yes.
It's very influenced by those 1950s kind of films and that tone. So I think it makes sense why the violence was also kind of pulled back a bit, in the sense of like it is very much rooted in that kind of, like, I mean, the kill at the opening with the gentleman in the car, we never see what happens. His body just falls out, which is very 1950s. There's a lot of that too, where it's very much that we don't necessarily see the carnage that much. There's only a couple that we really do. It's more we kind of see the aftermath and or just like the people's reactions to it.
Yes.
So it's like it's a very reserved, very old school approach to horror filmmaking at the time.
It's that theater of the mind,
Mhm.
I think it's very interesting to kind of build that tension of what's going on in your head, kind of like with The Shape of, the blank canvas. He could be anything with that white face that you can really place on there your worst fear. So, I think they really did lean on that for Christine. I think it works so well, especially when you just cut away from a lot of the violence. But when they stay on it, I mean, they stay on it. So I think there's a lot of interesting things here. But yeah, we'll probably touch on that a little bit more, maybe on production. We might want to get into the actual story itself.
Yes, I was gonna say, I think we'll we'll head into our first segment here, which we love, and so a tributing call from the last podcast we did where we kind of got the inspiration for this opening here. This is actually one of Luke's calls here when it came to transitions. The account of the macabre.
The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths, in particular Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. It is all the more tragic in that they were young, but had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes, so this is where we break down our story. We like to get into things. Luke likes to read us a little synopsis here of kind of, we're wrapping up what exactly goes on from point A to point B. And then we like to kind of go sometimes scene by scene. Sometimes we just in general talk about parts we like. But for the most part, we're just talking story here.
Yes, sir. So we can hop right into it. Hot off the assembly line in the Motor City, we meet our lovely lady Christine, a crimson paint job, new car smell, and an appetite to kill. When an auto worker takes a little break and accidentally drops ashes in Christine's leathery interior, she isn't having any of it as he finds himself dead in the front seat. As we jump 21 years later to 1978, popular football star Dennis picks up his not-so-popular buddy Arnie for school. As the duo starts their senior year, Dennis explains that they have to get Arnie laid this year, but Arnie doesn't think he has the Scrabble skills to impress any of the ladies at school. When newcomer Lee shows up for the school year, she catches all the eyes of the boys who want to tutor her student body. Arnie is late for lunch when the school bully, who has an affection for switchblades and sideburns, Buddy Repperton, is just so curious to see what Arnie's brown bagging. After a less than successful first day, Arnie catches a glimpse of his new love, Christine, sitting in a driveway looking a little worse for wear. When Arnie gets out his checkbook and picks up the tab for Christine, our love story begins when Arnie shows her how good he really is with his hands. Restoring Christine to her old self, the two begin their love affair, and nothing will come in between them. Until Lee shows up with Arnie at a football game. Catching Dennis's attention, he nearly loses his head and the feeling in his legs as he gets tackled in oblivion by the opposing team. By the time Dennis wakes up, Arnie is the coolest dude on the block, or at least he would be if it was 1958. Buddy and his boys decide to make a pit stop over at Darnell's late at night to give Christine a little makeover with some crowbars and switchblades. As Arnie prepares to rebuild Christine, he confesses his love to her, then realizes there's a little more than meets the eye as Christine regenerates herself. Having Buddy and his gang in her headlights, Christine makes mincemeat out of Moochie as she goes on a late-night drive. Not letting anyone else escape, Buddy ends up as overcooked roadkill when he just isn't fast enough to get out of Christine's way. Dennis and Lee plan an intervention of sorts as they realize Arnie is diving deep into the world of Buddy Holly music, slick back hair, and sports jackets of the 1950s. The trio prepares for the final showdown at Darnell's as Christine shows up with Arnie to make this a foursome. Arnie rides with Christine down the highway to hell as he flies through the windshield, getting pierced with glass through his heart. As he dies and reaches out for Christine, he isn't the only one who is heartbroken. Christine plots her revenge on Lee, but it is cut short as Dennis, in a bulldozer, sneaks up and crushes Christine. Christine and Arnie's love is unable to conquer all, as Dennis and Lee smash Christine into scrap metal, leaving her in a junkyard. As we come to an end, Christine shows some signs of life, vowing death to the shitters of 1978. And that is Christine in a nutshell.
Excellent movie. Like we said right off the rip there, I mean, we're both huge fans. But I mean, like, it's a unique story, even just in and of itself. You talk about films, you try to pitch this to somebody, And there's no easy way around it. You got to tell them the movie's about a killer car.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you kind of pitch that idea and people are like, what? Like, that sounds goofy. People probably think of things like Rubber when they hear stuff like that. But I mean, it's menacing. It really is. I love the playful nature of Christine. And, again, I talk about it all the time with Michael Myers and how I think that I love that Carpenter let him be a little bit more playful with his kills and, kind of the way he arranged people and, the way he kind of stalked them and stuff. And again, you get that beautiful understanding of fear and horror and evil with Christine. And, it's one of those things where it's just like, I gotta say, like, watching it this past time, for the podcast here was one of the most, I think, cathartic watches for me in the sense of understanding not only just how evil the car is, but actually really sensing its emotion and really picking up on, how it switches the songs and how it communicates and the vibes to it and everything, and really feeling that power that overtakes Arnie. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, again, I think this movie is endlessly rewatchable because I do pick up so much every time. And if it's not the car you're leaning into, it's the characters.
Yes.
Because there's a lot there. I think my first viewing, rewatching it after I was young, I could say that like that was what I think I got into the most then, were the characters, and the car was kind of second fiddle. So this time watching it and really leaning into the car, it's just like, again, it's like two different movies to me almost. It's crazy. It's really well done. Like, I'm like, again, a perfect melding of both directing and writing here.
And that's where it's like looking at this, and you never really know what you're going to think when you're talking about, it's about a killer car, and this could go, one of two ways. And it's really hard to, as I had said earlier, where one of the things that I really like about this film is the tension they built. And for me, it's almost like taking on that idea of a killer car and how are you going to approach this? Because let's look at the original Halloween. He's the Shape. He stalks. He can show up anywhere. You know what I mean? In 1 minute he's one place, the next minute he's through the window behind the couch. So it's like he can sneak up on you any which way. Where it's like when you look at the car, a killer car, it's hard to approach that because it's hard to build tension because once you see the car, it's hard to lose the vision of the car because it's so big. It's not going to be able to really sneak up on you. It's something where it's like you should be able to see it coming. So to have it come out of nowhere, it would be hard to do. And I think John Carpenter really is able to build that tension, especially as we're talking about the story here. One of the scenes that has profoundly affected me and my, I guess, creativity in terms of, you had brought up properties that we have worked on, and it's like the TV series, the scene with Moochie getting out of the truck, and as he's walking under the underpass, and then we hear the music that Christine's playing, and he can't see her at first, and then he's looking around, and then he sees, and the one of the perfect tension builders I feel that they utilize here with Christine is the turning all the lights, where it's like she has them off, she's just sitting there, you can't really see her, and then the lights hit, and then they illuminate everything. And it's like that scene of the lights turning on, her slowly rolling out from the underpass, and Moochie just watching and being confused at first, and then thinking, Arnie's inside. And that scene for me is something that really lives on in my head all the time when I think about this film. And then just the back and forth of Moochie trying to elude Christine and her just being right on him, and then being stuck in that little storage unit with nowhere to go. I just think being able to build that tension and waiting to see almost a resolution there is just perfect, and it's like, I think that's such attributed to John Carpenter, because taking a Stephen King property like that, and again, I haven't read it, which I definitely, us talking about the novelization of Halloween Ends and seeing how that was from the novel to the film, I think it would be very interesting for us to both dive into Christine and then just to see what works and what doesn't. But, put a pin in that maybe at a later date, because it is an undertaking in terms of reading that book. But to take the words on the page and then bring that to life, it's such a that was on John Carpenter's shoulders, and this feels like a John Carpenter vehicle. You know what I mean? Where it's you can
Easily.
see like all the techniques that he uses in his other films are very blatant here, and they all work to perfection.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you that it's like it is a John Carpenter vehicle. I mean, he uses everything he's learned up to this point on how to build tension and how to, you can really see how he's a master of this stuff, like of his craft. Because I mean, like, if there's anything that you pull away from Carpenter, it's characters and how to build tension and how to put those characters in positions where your audience cares for them, but cares for them enough to be afraid for them. And this is an excellent way to do it. And I agree with you. I think that the Halloween Ends novelization, I mean, you've read books and novelizations, a few at least in our time of just like hanging out together. But like I think that was a big one for us to kind of say, hey, we need to start looking into this more. We need to look into this. And I mean, with this being based off of a Stephen King novel, it's one that I mean to look into more of his work and things like that. So it's like I'm definitely more motivated than ever to start kind of diving into that and maybe figuring out a way to make more content for the channel revolving around that, because I mean, he's the master of horror, and there's so many films based off of his works, and this one means a lot to us. So yeah, I would really love to see the changes and just to see what it is, because really done right, a novel compared to a film, they're totally different things. They're totally different interpretations. And I'm super excited about it. I mean, Silver Bullet is a great one. It's Cycle of the Werewolf. Very different presentation. There's some themes, there's characters, a scenario or two that are very similar to the film. Other than that, it's a totally different story. So it's just one of those things where it's like, I would love to see what Stephen King's interpretation of this is, how he handles the car. I want to know what the car thinks and how it ticks and really where it comes from, because that's what you're going to get out of the novel. You're going to get more in depth with this stuff, and probably more in depth with a character that we hear about, but we don't see anything about, which is the old man who sells Arnie the car, his brother.
Yes.
And how he came to get the car and everything, and how that all happened. They talk about the tragic story of his wife killing herself in the car, or killing herself in the car, kind of thing. It's all really well told and well done here, but to expand upon that, I would love to see more of this.
Yeah, and I do have a note or two about maybe some that main alteration that we'll dive into in the production portion of this, just because it was kind of such a heavy alteration that I'm intrigued to kind of get that point of view, just to see what you think a little bit. But going into the actual story that we do get with Christine, I mean, I think as we talked about these characters, I think the characters, there's a perfect introduction here, where we open up on the assembly line, we see Christine, and it's 1958, and then one of the perfect techniques for me in terms of filmmaking and to really signify this transition. Yes, we do get the 1958 pop up on the screen initially, and then we get the oh no, sorry, it's 1957, and then we get the 1978 pop up a second later. But one of the things that I loved about just the little things here that I think people pay attention to, but it could go overlooked, is as the auto worker falls out and they do the beep because of they found the dead body, and Buddy Holly, Not Fade Away, is on the on the radio, and then as soon as we hop into 1978, Dennis is listening to the Tanya Tucker version of Not Fade Away. So we're seeing those kind of that cover from 1957, and it's just so interesting to kind of signify those transitions in times, to say that original version of the song sounds so much different than the version that he's listening to on the radio at that point in time. So it's such a it kind of signifies that transition in the difference in time period that we're in, and what's now in vogue as opposed to what was in vogue in 1957. And I think that's a perfect introduction when Dennis pulls into Arnie's driveway. He's cool. It's like he's got the Letterman's jacket on. He's sitting there. He's waiting. And Arnie's mom comes out and she's like, that's noise pollution. And we kind of get that little taste of the home life from Arnie as Arnie runs out and spills garbage all over the driveway, and he's forgetting his lunch and he runs back right through the puddle. And, it's just like all this perfect stuff that is such minor. It's like all this character building within 2 minutes, and it's perfect. It gets these characters set up, and then we get the conversation as, oh, we got to get you laid, and it's kind of, we understand that high school dynamic. And this friendship here, this bond is something that I absolutely love, that we don't really ever get. It's, you look at Stranger Things and they're all playing Dungeons and Dragons. They're all, geeks, is what they probably be termed as in the 80s. It's like, so they're all hanging out with each other. But here we're getting that kind of strong bond between a quote unquote geek and a popular jock, and their friendship has stood the test of time.
Yeah. And okay, you said stood the test of time, because I was going to say, I feel like Dennis was very much a geek at one point.
Yeah.
I get that impression that he moved on from it. He started playing sports. Obviously, puberty was very kind to him. So it's some of those things where it's just like, he kind of got an easier path out of there. And so, it's some of those things where it's like, I definitely think that that's more the dynamic where it's like, Arnie is still his best friend.
Yeah.
Even regardless of the, new pals that he's making on the football team and stuff like that. And it's almost to that detriment though, because like, it just seems like Dennis, never really realizes or picks up on the fact that everybody else looks at Arnie very differently.
Yeah.
Whether he's choosing to remain blind to it or it's just how he sees the world. I don't know, but I do want to say I enjoy their dynamic a lot, and I love the change of when things start to happen because, of course, as we talked about in the summary there, Dennis has an incident which causes him not to be able to play football again, which is a big deal for him because I mean that's kind of what built up his popularity. That's kind of where he was headed, and to lose that. It's kind of one of those things where it's like that really kind of puts him back down to Arnie's level in a sense, and maybe in his mind.
Yeah.
But by that point, Arnie is so far gone because he's so entranced in Christine that it doesn't even matter to Arnie. Like he doesn't even see it that way. He's like, I'm beyond all of you guys. As long as I got my car, I'm good, kind of thing. So it's like I love the way they play with dynamics in this, and I think that a lot of that comes from, obviously. Carpenter knowing how to cast and direct people, but I think a good majority of that I wouldn't be surprised comes from the book as well, because I mean like that's classic Stephen King character tropes right there of just like kind of having the dynamic of two different people that kind of intermingle.
Yeah, and it works so well. And for me, I think I've always seen Dennis as the kind of guy that doesn't really care because in lesser hands, this could have been played more so as, Dennis is friends with Arnie, but he doesn't really talk to him when people are around. But like when Arnie is there trying to get his locker open and Dennis just pops it open for him and he's talking to everybody like, it's no big deal. There is really no almost hierarchy in high school. He doesn't.
And
really...
that's the life he's trying to portray and live. And so it's like he never sees it from Arnie's perspective.
Yes.
It's because to him, it's like Arnie is my best friend and these guys are my friends. So we're all cool. But it's like he doesn't see the actual torment that Arnie gets.
And and I like that though we're kind of seeing this by varying varying eyes where it's like, yes, Arnie, I guess you can make an argument is somewhat of a main character, but also I think Dennis, it's almost like divvied up almost evenly where we're seeing it through the lens of Arnie a lot for the very beginning. And then we kind of, as he falls farther into, being entranced by Christine, we start seeing it more so from Dennis's perspective, and him trying to like pull him out of that trance that he's just enamored with Christine. As we start also bleeding into, Lee coming in and wanting what's best for Arnie. So we're really kind of transitioning the perspectives from all three of these different characters by the end of this film. So we almost have this very unique transition where whether we see the main character as, our tragic character or not, we're usually with them for the entire ride of the film. Whereas we almost it's almost a relay race where, we're with Arnie for a decent amount of time and then we get passed off to Dennis and Lee by the end of this film, and by the time we're looking at this, and the dust is settled, and the exhaust has cleared, Arnie is done for. Christine is smushed, and now we sit with Dennis and Lee, which I think is a very interesting kind of dynamic that we do get. We don't really get that with a lot of films.
It is. And can I hit you with something that I felt this time around watching it? I don't necessarily think Arnie is a main character. I think that this story is more told through Dennis's perspective, because Arnie seems to me more like a catalyst. He seems almost like this, he was always so meek and he was always so shy and just so Arnie that, when this evil starts to overtake him, nobody really took it serious. Nobody saw it as anything more than just, an obsession with a car, until everything was way too late. Because it's one of those things where it's like, yes, to a degree, Arnie is a main character, sure, but like it is an interesting dynamic. I almost see Dennis as our lead because it's like it's at the end of the day, he loses his best friend. And, he watched him go down this rabbit hole, and before he could really even do anything about it, he was too far gone.
Yeah.
And he has to live with that. And that's kind of like what they're stuck with at the end there, is not only with the ending of destroying Christine, but, clearly the loss of their friend and, friend and boyfriend at that point. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic. I wouldn't fault anybody for seeing it the other way too, but it's just, again, it's unique and it's different. And I think it's another reason why this to me is a story that I can never really get tired of, because it's like you can always see a different perspective in this movie.
Yeah, and for me, it's again, it's hard for me to kind of really choose one side here. As I watch this more and more, it seems more so an ensemble perspective rather than one sole perspective, because it's like by the end of this, yes, I agree that Dennis is, I would feel, is a main character, but there's so much going on with Arnie in the very first half of this film with him kind of coping with where his status is. In this new high school senior dynamic here, that the Buddy Repperton problems, and him getting Christine and fixing Christine up, and then his interactions with Darnell. There's so much tension that falls on Arnie's shoulders. It's hard for me to say that he wouldn't be one of our main characters. So for me, I think I fall as I dive more down the Christine rabbit hole and I live with this film a little bit longer. I feel like this is such an ensemble cast perspective rather than we're putting everything on one person's shoulders, because everything, the dynamic that we get here is everything that's happening to Arnie, Dennis tries to take on. And then as at one point it just becomes, he's beyond help and Dennis can't take on anything, as like we see with the interaction with Buddy Repperton. When Dennis finds out that he's having, being when Arnie's being bullied by Buddy Repperton, he has no hesitation. He goes down there and he's ready to, tell him to get his lunch and let's go. And then when that doesn't work, he's ready to defend Arnie as much as he can. So it's like one of those things where Arnie facilitates the story so much, it's hard for me to say that he wouldn't be casted as at least one of our main characters, because everything, is there because of Arnie.
And yeah, I totally get that. And that's why I say like he's kind of like our catalyst over a character, in the sense of like he's obviously a character, but it's like I feel like his function is more to progress the story, and it actually, his actions are just cause and effect to the sense of like what's happening in the story, like what is going on with the story, to kind of watch this guy go down this rabbit hole almost to the sense of like unknowingly, like he just thinks that he's finally breaking the mold and getting out of the meek nerd stuff, but when everybody else is kind of like, no, this is something different, and it's like I totally get it. Like I understand your perspective as well. It's just like the point I was trying to illustrate with all of that was just how much more you can really take out of this film.
Absolutely.
And just from different rewatches, I mean, like that's two different perspectives. I mean, like, would I have felt that way the first time I watched it? No, I probably would have said that Arnie's the main character, and Dennis is kind of like a co-lead, but
Yep.
then again, I watch it this time and I'm like, well, I kind of feel like Dennis is the lead and Arnie's kind of like a co-lead or a catalyst of some sort. It's like, and that's again, I think you don't get that if you don't have a competent director mixed with a very seasoned, strong writer. And it's just like it is again a shame, and I'll probably say it multiple times that we never got this matchup again, because like wow, like just the little dynamics there. We haven't even really talked about the kills or anything yet, or any of the crazy
No.
stuff that happens in this film. We've just been focused on characters so far.
Yeah, and
So
I think that's such a strong portion of the story is like having that strong base of characters, and then in this film where it's like we get kills sprinkled out, but we don't get a lot of kills till way later in the half after Buddy Repperton and the gang really decide to do a number on Christine, and then Christine comes after she regenerates. That's when we start getting the kills, and we really lean a little bit more into that horror. Um, and once that happens, I mean, it's straight out of the gate. Like once we open with that Moochie kill, I mean, that tension that's built there, just the cinematography, the feel. And again, as we talked about that cutaway where we don't really see it. And then when we get introduced to Harry Dean Stanton's character, it's just like another set of tension being brought on here. And that's really where this is the horror elements, the thriller elements, the suspense, it really amps up. And that's probably almost a little bit before the hour mark, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's like they really they do well with kind of again showing the slow descent of Arnie as well, because again that's important to it. He's kind of drawn into it, and we don't fully understand what it is that allures him. And it's like I guess we never fully get it. We can only just say that the car has a hold over him.
Yes.
And it's just something where it's like, again, he does kind of say it for himself when he first sees the cars. It's almost like a rebellious kind of decision, because this is a car that his parents would never want him to own, and
Yep.
no one would really ever want him to own, because it's kind of a piece of junk. But he's doing it because he feels like, I need to do something for myself. I need to break my mold. I need to get out of my shell. So it's like it kind of he looks at Christine as like this kind of way out from all this horrible bullshit that he's had to endure. And I think it's only more fitting that all happens right after he has the day that he has at school, where he gets a switchblade pulled on him and his lunch spilled out all over the place and he's getting beat up a little bit. So it's like it just shows that it's like, yeah, this is my senior year. I'm not gonna be the same old Arnie. I'm gonna start doing shit for myself. And it's like it's just such a it's one of those things where it's like when you first watch the film, you really don't pick up on stuff like that. But as you watch later on, it's really just like, to an extent, yes, he does get possessed by the car in a sense. He does have this unnatural bond with the evil, but it's almost like he's probably very willing to let that happen. And I think one of the moments in there is just after the car is destroyed by Buddy and his friends, how he just tells the car to show him.
Yes.
And the car rebuilds itself, and you see the first actual real inkling that this is a possessed vehicle.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where it's like that's in the moment for me where he gives himself over to the evil. And I know you're gonna hate this. You're gonna be so mad that I'm gonna bring this up. I think that's what they were trying to do with Halloween Ends. That's the exact reason why people compare it to Christine. Because, again, not even just the line choice, but like that is what Corey did. Corey was put down, he was bullied, and then he sees this escape in a way, this way to change his life up. And he says, I'm going to get revenge on people, so show me how to do it. Show me how to get out of here. And he gives himself over to the evil. But we can move on from that. We don't have to talk about that if you don't want to, Luke. I know it's a touchy subject for you.
Yeah. I mean, like for me, people can draw any comparison they want if they want. For me, like that comparison to Christine to Halloween Ends doesn't really hold up. I think it's a very weak comparison for anyone to draw parallels to Christine and Halloween Ends. I mean, I understand that Corey Cunningham becomes enamored in a sense, and yes, he's bullied, and I think maybe visually there could be a comparison to Arnie and all of these other things. But I feel like to draw that comparison, that let's see, that we sit with Arnie for so long, and there is this strong relationship built between him and Christine, and we're waiting for it. We're waiting for it. We know we're anticipating, and then even before he says, "Show me," there is this strong point of dialogue that he says, "We're gonna show them. We'll show all the shitters." As
Yeah,
he
and I'm not saying that Halloween Ends does it well.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying that it's
No.
like that's where the connections made.
No. In my rebuttal, isn't saying to you. This is my rebuttal to Halloween Ends in the comparison, where to draw that comparison. Hey, if you want to pick out a point in dialogue and say because he says that, then we're drawing a straight comparison to Christine. Hey, by all means, go for it. Do I think it holds water? No, because these characters, as we've been talking about, are so well built before we get to that point. That connection is really established before we get to that point, and we're waiting for it. We're waiting for it. That it's a big payoff when we get to show me, and it's way more meaningful than when, as you're bringing up Halloween Ends, a film that I have watched over the past month and a half, a handful of times. I had to sit here and jog my brain about that show me line because it's, for me, weak. You know what I mean? It's such a passing moment where the moment in Christine is absolutely defining.
It's iconic.
Yes, and it's where Arnie again plays it so well. Keith Gordon talked about how, as he was watching this off screen, obviously not seeing it, made it look thinking of watching a woman put on a striptease for him, and the seductive music that plays as Christine's regenerating. It's like so well done. There are so many different meanings there that it's hard for me to not get a little riled up when we discuss Halloween Ends has Christine undertones.
And I don't think it helps either that David Gordon Green specifically called out Christine.
Yes.
When in the lead up to the film and saying, oh, is this too much Christine? It this? And it's like, so everybody's of course going to look for that going into the film.
Yeah.
And they kind of do blow it up a little bit more. But yeah, no, I definitely understand that because like it's, we're dealing with evil. At the end of the day, whether it's in a car, whether it's in a motorcycle or a goddamn refrigerator, it's evil. It is just an encapsulation of evil. There is no reason for the car to be this way. It just is. And I think, again, that is Carpenter's bread and butter. That is his interpretation of evil, and why I think that this material works just as well as Halloween works, because it's just like he really latches on well to kind of that having that almost unestablished kind of out on a limb. We don't need to understand it. We're not trying to. We just know that it is what it is. It's darkness, it's evil incarnate, it is the devil, whatever you want to call it. And it's, again, I think why this to me is one of his best horror films. I mean, I think that all his horror films are great.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where it's like, to me, this is, well, I can't say that for certain. I have not seen The Ward, and I think that's one of the few that I have not seen out of his filmography. But I hear it isn't great. But we'll have to check it out at some point. But it is one of those things where it's like, I think that is why he's the perfect pick for this material. not only with what we've just been discussing with these characters and everything. And I mean, if we want to talk about him from a visual standpoint, some of my favorite scenes in this film are, the car rebuilding itself, of course, like we talked about with that show me scene. Um, when he drives down the road and runs over Buddy Ripperton. Honestly, that whole sequence with Buddy Ripperton, I love, where he pulls into the gas station or the kind of the auto body shop, and that blows up, and then he's on Christine's on fire, and she chases Buddy. It's like, it's all really riveting shit, and it's awesome. Like I really really love it.
Absolutely phenomenal stuff. I mean, we'll be able to touch on this stuff here in a couple of other segments as well. So why don't we hop into maybe a little cast and crew action?
Oh, you want to go to cast and crew?
I don't know. What's the next segment?
Behind the mask.
There we go. Let's do it.
The behind the scenes. So we'll do that. So we'll move into our next segment, which we love to call Behind the Mask.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween to Bergerac.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horathon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween to Bergerac.
Yes, gotta love it. Love that theme every time I hear it. But yeah, so this is Behind the Mask. This is where we talk production, everything that went on behind this film, as far as pulling it together, everything except the cast and crew. Really, we have our own segment for that. But yeah, so we're just going to talk a little bit about production, some fun facts, things. Luke, this being your pick, why don't you start us off? How do you want to talk about? What do you want to open with when it comes to the production of Christine?
The production, I want to start this off. As we were just talking about the story. I want to talk a little bit, I guess you would say this bleeds into that story, as we were talking about what's omitted from the Stephen King novel and how we transition that into a film, where we had the screenwriter here, Ben Phillips, and he was talking, I was listening to a couple different interviews with him, and he said, the book, a novel, is about a 20-hour experience, give or take, as you're reading it. So going into a film that's usually about a 2-hour experience, you really have to, as you get that source material, you have to decide on, what am I going to be losing here? So as he was looking at the actual novel, which is another interesting tidbit, that, this novel came out days before they were slated to start production. So as they were doing pre-production things and the script was being written, the novel of Christine had not even been released yet. So looking at this, as we were talking earlier, a character that does not appear in the film version is Roland LeBay, which is the previous owner of Christine. And the difference here is that when we look at this, in the novel, Roland LeBay is very much a character that is possessing Christine and the root of the evil here. So he's riding in the car a lot of the times, with Arnie kind of feeding him the lines and kind of almost possessing him in a sense. And we do get a little bit of that, I think, in Christine. It's more of the aura of the 1950s, of when Christine was built, rather than Roland LeBay himself. So they kind of cut out all that stuff. And one of the main influences there was, Ben Phillips had said, as they were writing this, American Werewolf in London had just come out, and we have that dynamic of a dead friend influencing, so he didn't want to do that because American Werewolf had done it so well. So we do kind of get this difference in story, and as soon as they cut that, a lot of development had been cut because we don't need the development of Roland LeBay anymore. So I was kind of from your perspective, because, I said this film's not very divisive, but I have heard people saying they kind of like the idea of Roland LeBay being the possessor in a sense, versus Christine just being inherently evil. I was curious of what your perspective, especially being an American Werewolf in London fan, would you have liked to have seen something like that? Or do you think it works a little bit better with Christine just being built evil?
Hey, hindsight's always 20/20. We talk about it constantly on this show. I'd have to see it. I like the idea of it. I think it works really well for the novel, because it definitely gets you a little bit more into the head space of the, obviously who that guy was and everything, and him kind of talking to Arnie and kind of, giving you more of a believable take to it. Honestly, I try not to shy away from remakes in this. If they were to remake this film, that is a route I'd like to see them go. I wouldn't want to see them just do this, because I don't think you can do this any better. So it's like, if you were going to take it, try to get it closer to the novel with that. But yeah, I think that overall, I'm fine as long as Carpenter is behind the wheel here with this one, of it being just the personification of evil. But it does interest me. I think it's cool. I like it a lot in the sense of like how that's that kind of story is portrayed. I know that that's a storytelling device that is a lot of fun to work with. I know that we have a concept, or at least you came up with a concept that uses a similar style of storytelling. So it's one of those things where it's like, I think that we, have played in that realm a little bit ourselves. So it does open it for, I would say it makes it easier for the audience to kind of come in and understand things.
Yeah.
But it does it maybe leave you with a little too much information on the table to where it's not as interesting to chew on. It makes it more consumable, possibly, but I'd have to see how it plays out in the book. So like, if I read it in the book and I like it, if it's used very sparingly, that'd be cool. But yeah, I think all in all, this is my preferred version of how they did it. I don't want to see it done differently again, unless you're actually retelling the story or redoing it. But like, to kind of add that into this film, I don't think it needs it.
Yeah, and for me, looking at this, of Christine, not reading the book has always just been inherently evil for me. And when there's a novel out there and then it becomes a film, I always say there has to be a reason for the film. There has to be a variation. You don't want to go paint by numbers of the exact telling of what the novel has said. So I do like this variation here, and almost this idea of Roland the Bay being the person behind the possession of Christine. I think that works very well from a novel perspective, because like you were saying, that would probably be very dialogue heavy. It's a little more handholdy in a sense, where you can ride shotgun with them and live in that interaction. Whereas I feel like if you see that on screen, it's just a little too much. I like the abstract idea of Christine being created, and she's just evil. You know what I mean? We don't need any more explanation than that, and that for me seems very John Carpenter-esque when you look at his films, where it's like, it just is, you know what I mean? We don't need an overly explained idea here. She comes off the assembly line evil, and as we talk about this,
It's in her bone. She's bad to the bone, brother.
Exactly. There we go. It's established at the very beginning, and I do love that. That visual at the very opening scene where she's on the assembly line and Christine is the only red car, just as she sticks out like a sore thumb. I think that's perfect. Obviously, the red, the blood red. So I think that works as well. So for me, I love the idea of her being inherently evil. I know some people do take issue with that, as they would love to see maybe a little more of the explanation with Roland LeBay, which with this film, I don't think you need it. And maybe that's because I've lived with it for so long. We didn't get that explanation, but I do feel like, at this point in time, you didn't need to live in that interaction and get an over explained idea out there. It works for what it is, and kind of lives with the aura of Christine and just being evil, and kind of getting those almost, this works as so much like a love story and also a monster movie, so it's like, it has so many different undertones and so diverse.
I absolutely agree. I like that interpretation of it being kind of that love story like a monster. And that, again, that even goes back to even older 1920s classic Universal monster stuff, where it's like a lot of those were misunderstood creatures. So it's kind of like, yeah, you kind of lead into that love story-esque kind of stuff. And yeah, I like that. I think that it's definitely an interesting take. Again, I'm just going to say that I would have to see how it all shakes out, to what degree we're going with it, and just overall, just what the person would do with that being in hand. Do I think Carpenter could have made it work? Absolutely. I
Yeah.
do, especially in his prime right now, where he's at the time of this film. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I like the interpretation they went with enough.
Yeah.
And again, if they want to remake it and go that route, yeah, that would be the way to do it. Because again, to remake something, you never want to go, if you can avoid it, you don't want to go close to or just retelling what the original was. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about The Thing being my favorite film of all time. I think it's perfect, or favorite horror film of all time. It's perfect. You know, I wouldn't change anything about it. But do I have my own story? It's a mini series. Yeah, I do. But it's very different. It is
Yeah.
completely different. There's the most you'll get is little slight references to the film, but that's all that it has to be. You know, that's for the fans. So it's like, yeah, I'd be more curious to see somebody kind of take that concept and do it. But is it necessary? No. I think
Yeah.
they nail it right then and there with the song "Bad to the Bone." Just evil incarnate just came into this car, and that's why she is the way she is. Because once you kind of start getting into the fundamentals of it, I think that's what would turn this from being a really great movie into it being goofy. Is
Yeah.
if you start getting into this is why she is the way she is. This is what it is because the soul of this person's trapped in it, and blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, that's a little dumb. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you get more for less. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And I do like the idea that you brought up. You had an idea for like a mini series because I feel like if we introduce the idea of Roland LeBay here, this almost has to become a mini series because there's going to be so much that you're going to have to cover, probably to establish so many different things. You're probably going to need more than an hour 50 runtime because it just becomes so much story at that point to kind of really make this feel with a natural flow and not seem like you're trying to fit everything into a 2-hour time span just because there would be so much. So, if this, I know they've talked about a remake in terms of a film, but, I feel like if you want to introduce that Roland LeBay character, it would probably have to be a bit of a miniseries because that would probably be a pretty good undertaking.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see if they were to do a remake, really what route they would go with that. It's
Yeah.
like, would they want to do a series? I mean, you and I were very partial to a lot of these stories becoming series because, obviously it gives you more room to tell the story. I think we've seen enough films go back and try to remake stuff, some successfully, some not so successfully. But yeah, I think like if you could just have, the 8 episodes, the 8 hours, if you will, as like a standard runtime to really expand this story, you could do that where you spend, 2 episodes or so with the creation of Christine. Like it opens up on the assembly line. You see Roland LeBay's storyline all play out. And then by episode 3, we cut to 21 years later, and then we're catching up with Arnie.
Yes.
Like that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to see because, it's like we're living in a golden age of television. Like, I mean, 2022 has been a golden age of horror. Like, I mean, not a golden age, but if we continue on the path that we're on
It's
for
a
another
year to
couple of
remember.
years, yeah, it's definitely a year to remember. It's been great. But it's one of those things where it's like television has been dominating since the early 2010s. I'd say from probably 2012 to 2013 on, maybe even a little earlier, television's been absolutely killing it with just the way that it's been going as far as series go. And I think that it's still running really well. Obviously, at some point we got a little oversaturated, but now we're kind of weeding that out. But it's one of those things where it's like I think that a lot of projects would benefit from becoming series because then you
Yes.
get more time. You get more time to build characters. Not saying that every project does. Like obviously, you got a story like, and this is more recent, but like a 10 Cloverfield Lane or better one, Assault on Precinct 13. Not enough material there for a series.
Yeah.
It works perfectly as a film. But it's kind of like if you have something like this that's based off of a novel, yeah, get into it a little bit. Go in there and see what you would do with something like that because I'm sure you could flush out, another couple hours at least of this. And we live in that golden age of streaming too, where it's like, who says that you have to have 8 episodes?
Yeah.
You know, maybe you have 5 episodes and it's deemed a mini series or a limited series and they're an hour a piece, and then you throw it up there. You know, if you got a 5-6 hour movie, just chop it up, go to town, and then people will love it, you know?
Yep. And especially with the rich universe that John Carpenter can create alone. There are so many properties of his that you could say, oh, we could do a miniseries off of. And then the rich properties that Stephen King creates. You know, it's like both these two coming together, you can get, a decent, even 10 episode miniseries out of something. And I think Christine could be an interesting undertaking in that sense. And again, looking at the production here, this really wasn't a trouble production at all. Like listening to John Carpenter speak about this was honestly, he seemed so positive in the experience here. I listened to the commentary between him and Keith Gordon on the Blu-ray edition. And I mean, there's so much interplay. Keith Gordon is so complimentary of John Carpenter, and he said, I mean, you guys were just a breeze to direct. So there wasn't really too much here. One of the things that did stick out, going into like the casting, this kind of bleeds over a little bit, where they had the studio had initially wanted Scott Baio to be cast, as well as Brooke Shields, and I thought that was interesting. I know Kevin Bacon was attached as well, for a short time, and like
Who is he
looking at
going to
that,
play?
what'd you say?
Dennis? Was he going to play Dennis?
Scott,
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon, or Scott Baio?
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon, they never really said. They said as a lead, so I don't know which one. For me, looking at John Stockwell and looking at Kevin Bacon, I feel like that was probably going to be the character that he was going to play because they have similarities to each other. But like looking at it, I know John Carpenter and Stephen King both were pretty adamant about using unknowns here. And one of the things I wanted to bring up that this in the commentary, they mentioned a lot of the time Carpenter kind of leans into that this was a negative pickup production. Where it's one of those, it's kind of a unique relationship between, the producers and the actual studio. So Columbia Pictures was the one that ended up purchasing this film. But the way that this works, at least from my research here, is that the way this works is, the budget here was $10 million. So theoretically, Columbia Pictures said, we'll buy this for $10 million from you, but you put up the money first. And that becomes kind of, it makes it easier for the producers to go to the bank and say, hey, Columbia Pictures will be purchasing this. We just have to get them the negative by this particular date. So that allows, it seems like very beneficial to the creatives attached to this because, Columbia Pictures wanted someone like Scott Baio attached or Brooke Shields, but they were able to come and say, no, we want to use unknowns here. And there wasn't really much say what Columbia Pictures, even though that's what they wanted, they didn't really have that say there. They could only, as long as you come up with that negative by that certain date, they have to pay out and then they take it from there. So, I thought that was very interesting because I don't hear too much about negative pickup productions. And, being able to call your own shots here is something that, John Carpenter, I'm sure, probably loved,
I was just about to say, I'm sure that was one of the biggest reasons why he signed on to it. Because, like, coming off of where he came, like, just not having to worry about producers, like, over your shoulder constantly. I mean, that was probably a dream.
Yes. And going into this, like, producer Robert Cobrit was the one that kind of, he produced Salem's Lot, and then King had come to him with the manuscripts for both Cujo and Christine, and he ended up picking Christine just because I think he was a big fan of Cars, I believe. So he ended up picking that. So it's like, Carpenter was his first pick. So it's like kind of going into this, I feel like, again, where Carpenter has nothing but positive things to say about just the production of this film, where it's like, this really did seem like a team where it's like we all have one specific direction, we're all backing each other, and we're all here to kind of nurture this story. So it's like looking into this, we always kind of want the dirt of all these productions, but this one really seemed pretty easy breezy for him. And it's like, with Carpenter and so much studio meddling a lot of times, it's like it's nice to know this guy at least got one break.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like, I think that for the most part, it was one of those things where it's like at this time he didn't have the worst way to go with it. But once you have a passion project that is, beaten up and maligned, I think that sticks with you. And I think that that's clearly stuck with him for years to come. Let's also not forget that at the time, he had also been kind of screwed out of a lot of royalties for Halloween and where that came from. And I don't know if at this point had he shed Halloween at this point yet, or
No, I think that wasn't he because we had Halloween 3. I think he officially shed it. I think during
after
Halloween
Halloween
4.
3. Yeah, because basically what was going on with that was just that like he was sick of it and he knew they were going to continue doing it and he wanted to stop having his name attached to it. He wanted them to stop coming to him about it. He was ready to move on. So, that's just kind of where we were with that. But unless you have anything else for this segment, Luke, I think we should probably move into the cast itself.
Yeah, let's move into the cast.
Alrighty, so we'll be moving into our next segment, which we call You Are All My Children.
You are all my children now.
Alrighty, so this is our cast and crew segment where we like to go down the line and, just tip our hats to everybody who is on the screen, behind the screen, whatever you had to do involved with making of this wonderful film, Christine. We're here to talk about you. Now, we talked a lot about Carpenter himself throughout this, so I think we can go without saying that, he's done great. And Stephen King himself. So why don't we focus up a little bit harder on some of the cast here? And really, I think Keith Gordon and John Stockwell, as I did my research on there, I was surprised to kind of see where their careers have gone over the years. John Stockwell, especially, he really landed himself into directing, which I was surprised to see a lot of. Like, he actually has had quite a career there. I mean, like, now he's kind of making a lot of direct to DVD stuff. But like things that kind of stuck out to me were around like the mid 2000s with things like Blue Crush, which I remember being kind of a bigger movie at the time. People really liked that one. And then Into the Blue. That's the one with Paul Walker and Jessica Alba. I just remember my dad renting that from Netflix, and I didn't really care about the story. I just knew there was one point where a shark attacked somebody. And I was all about it.
You remember.
Yeah. But then he also worked on another shark film called Dark Tide, which was okay with that was Holly Berry. And, it's one of those things where it's just kind of like I was surprised to kind of see the work that he was able to do. And then an actual movie that I can vouch for that is actually pretty good is called Kid Cannabis. It was on Netflix for a while. It was pretty solid. So I'm always curious to see actors transition to that. And, obviously, Keith Gordon himself also has directed quite a lot of stuff. His directing, though, I would say is a little bit more interesting in the sense of, he's still very much in that camp these days, directing a lot of television. Let me pull it up here. But he has directed episodes for shows like Legion and Fargo, Better Call Saul, The Killing, Dexter, House, and, a lot of stuff like that. So it's like he's got his hands in a lot of stuff. Homeland is another one that people I know really talk about. I haven't seen that one personally. But yeah, I mean, like he's in a lot of television directing episodes of that. And then, of course, he's got a couple of feature films and short films under his belt as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting to, as I said, I listened to that commentary between John Carpenter and Keith Gordon. And Keith Gordon, is very gracious toward John Carpenter, saying, he put up with so many different directing questions from Keith Gordon on Christine because he just wanted to pick John Carpenter's brain throughout the entire production. And that was always the kind of end game for Keith Gordon, was to end up behind the camera. So he had always looked at a lot of his acting as just like a free session of learning, the production portion of everything and just kind of getting that free tutorial. which is really interesting because it's like, yeah, looking at both these characters, and again, both extremely likable. I think they both carry great performances. And it's like to think that this led them to careers behind the camera. It's always compelling to think of what could have been if they had to pursue more acting, especially from my perspective. I think Keith Gordon had something special in terms of a lot of things that he had done. I really would have loved to have seen him kind of continue that acting career, to see what kind of performances he would have given, just because both these characters of Dennis and Arnold are absolutely so likable and almost timeless in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would have been real curious to see them kind of pursue a little harder. I mean, I gotta say, Keith Gordon, for me, he's always stuck in my mind as one of his very first acting roles. Is in a little film that I absolutely adore, and we're talking Jaws 2 was one of his early ones. I think his first film role was Jaws 2, if I remember correctly. But he also went on to be in things like Dress to Kill with Brian De Palma. And, you know, as he's kind of gone on, yeah, he did kind of pull away from the acting stuff probably about the, you know, mid 90s, I would say. He kind of stopped acting as much and went more into the directing side of things. But yeah, he really had something going for him there. A very unique take. And I mean, this is definitely one of his standout roles from the early years. But I mean, hey, that bug to direct, man. I mean, that comes in and you just want to tell stories. So it happens. And sometimes you just can't get rid of it. I think it also pays to point out that John Stockwell, he played Cougar in Top Gun. So that's definitely something, a highlight on his resume there as well. So something to keep an eye out. He's one of the guys that pilots run with a lot in the film. So if you've seen it in a long time, I love Top Gun. So
of course you do. And then moving on from our dynamic duo there, we have Alexandra Paul as Lee Cabot, which I think interesting choice. I had looked at how in the Stephen King version she was blonde and you know, very voluptuous, I guess is how she was described. So Carpenter went, you know, the brunette route with her, just to kind of add something, a little variation, I think, from the novel, which I mean, I think she's extremely likable as well. It's like all three of the main cast here, I mean, he really casted as likable people, you know, and I think she has that at the beginning almost a meek personality, but by the end of it, you really do see her take charge in terms of trying to vanquish Christine, and then you buy that she really does care about Arnie. So I think she brings a lot to the dynamic in the friendship between Arnie and Dennis.
Yeah, and you know, she went on to have, I think, an even, I would say, more profitable career than the other two, because I mean, like, she was credited with nearly 106 roles, most of it being television, but she's been popped up in things like the 1995 TV remake of Piranha, which not many people talk about that. Yeah, she was also in Baywatch. I see that,
which was like the big thing, I believe, for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that looks to be one of her big things there. But yeah, I mean, like, she's just spent a lot of time in the TV realm, having an ongoing career all the way through until just this year. So I mean, like, she's still out there working, which is great for her. I mean, that's awesome. You know, to be able to say you work in the business for that long. I'm sure she's had quite a few very nice paydays along the way to kind of give her a nice, comfortable life. Which, hey, it's always great. And, you know, you kind of starting your career off early with working with Carpenter. I'm sure that goes a long way.
Absolutely. And then we can kind of get into, so we have our main cast, and then we have, you know, a lot of almost character actors in a sense. And it's very interesting because I feel like, yes, they don't have a ton of lines, but they're so memorable. And I think that's just due to the casting and the way that these characters are presented, because we have Robert Prosky as Will Darnell, and I absolutely love the introduction to his character. When they pull into Darnell's and, you know, he's telling them you can't be smoking in here. And then you have the instant tension between Darnell and Dennis, and him kind of reading the riot act to Arnie, and, you know, knowing that Arnie's a pushover, he's just kind of having his way there as Dennis is kind of giving him the business from behind. So it's just a fun dynamic. I love when he kind of extends that olive branch to say, maybe I'll throw in a couple of bucks. And then Arnie's like, I have to think about it. He's like, well, don't think about it too hard or I'll throw you out in your fucking ass. It's like the instant switches there. Character is absolutely great. I mean, we don't see a lot with him. We don't spend a ton of time with him, but when we do, it's oh so memorable.
Absolutely. I think that he's a real bright spot. I love his sequence when he sees Christine roll in all smoldering from the fire and everything. So it's kind of like one of those things where he's walking up there with the shotgun and all that. It's just so creepy. I think bookended beautifully by the fact that when the police show up, Christine's all put back together and he's just sitting in there with the shotgun. Really creepy stuff. Gotta say, he plays Grandpa Fred in Gremlins 2, the new batch. So I gotta shout out that. I love Gremlins 2. Definitely our, as we record this, we can talk about it because the promo was posted yesterday for December to Dismember is coming up here. So not to divert fully, but we won't be covering Gremlins this year. But believe it or not, we will be talking Gremlins one of these upcoming Christmases, because I think those are both, even though the second one doesn't take place on Christmas, all-time Christmas classics for me.
Absolutely. And then we can move into, again, a small bit here, but Roberts Blossom as George LeBay, the gentleman who sells Arnie Christine initially. And again, not much with him, but just the presentation, the dialogue, and then I think we only see him about twice, and it's just unsettling kind of character.
Absolutely. He is like, you're right, he does show up twice in the film, but it is one of those things where it's like he's very memorable. Delivering the lines of dialogue, the slow kind of reveal of his brother and what happened with him, and kind of how he's withholding details. One thing I liked is how he's like, yeah, you can take her for $250, and then he walks away and they're like, oh, you said $300? Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, you said $250. It's like, I don't care, just take it. Like, you could tell he's just more like, I just want this demon out of my life at that point, kind of thing. It's a very interesting portrayal. Luke, do you recognize that actor?
No, not offhand.
So, do you remember Home Alone?
Is that him?
Yes, that is him.
Because I looked at him and I was like, and I actually meant to look that up, and I was like staring at him. I'm like, he looks like the guy from Home Alone. But then I was like, maybe he's not. And then and I never looked it up.
Yep, no, that is for those of you who are wondering what we're talking about. He is the old man from Home Alone, who obviously scares Macaulay Culkin throughout the story. Just kind of not necessarily terrorizing him, but just kind of giving him the business throughout. And then we find out later that he's actually a pretty nice guy. So it's one of those things where it's like, I kind of spotted that. I was very curious. So obviously, when I've rewatched movies a couple times, I do tend to peruse IMDb and a couple other sites to see where I recognize these people. And that was the one that stuck out to me there.
So I like to think he sold Christine, and then he moved across the street from Kevin McAllister.
There you go. And then he's just talking about how he misses his daughter and shit, which he never mentioned in Christine.
Listen, different walks of life. He didn't have that time to interject that dialogue about his entire family tree.
All right, fair. I'll give it to you. You win this round.
Alrighty, let's move into a character that we all love, an actor that we miss dearly, Mr. Harry Dean Stanton as Detective Rudy Jenkins. In this one, again, we get some with him. All this well casted all around, where it's like, we get the main cast, and then even the minor plays here adds so much to the story and different dynamics here. Every interaction he has with Arnie. You love Harry Dean Stanton just because he's a great actor, but it's like sometimes you're rooting for Arnie, sometimes you're not. You're hoping he's going to come out of this, but then so it's like always this battle of wits between Detective Jenkins and Arnie, and I just like the outside interaction between where he's not letting him leave, and they're talking about the paint and the body work. I mean, it's just so fun. It's so like he's trying to catch him in a lie. Arnie's trying to cover his tracks, and Detective Jenkins just won't leave him alone. So it's like, again, adding more tension to this. Harry Dean Stanton brings so much to his performances whenever he's on screen, and it's like just adding him into a John Carpenter movie. You can't beat it.
Absolutely. I'm a huge Harry Dean Stanton fan. Obviously, remembering him from things like Escape from New York, where he plays a small role there. I mean, we got to talk about Alien. I think that like him playing Brett there is one of his infamous roles he'll always be known for. But even to me, one that was actually recommended from, my buddy Andrew over at Review the Right Thing. He showed me many years ago that I really enjoy is Paris, Texas. Have you seen that one, Luke?
I haven't seen it. I've seen the cover and everything, but I've never actually watched it.
Yeah, it's on Criterion. It's a really good movie, really long, but very, very emotional, very solid film. And then I always remember him as the dad from Red Dawn when they go up to the fence.
Yes. Yep.
God, we talk about getting together that action film podcast,
Red Dawn,
and then we talk about movies that we'd love to talk about. Red Dawn, man, that would be fantastic. Great film, horrible remake.
Oh gosh,
have you ever seen it?
That one, yes.
It's fucked up. I hate it.
It's horrible.
It's so stupid. But yeah, no, Harry Dean Stanton absolutely kills it in this film. I think he kills it in just about every film he was in. Even ones to super recent for him before he passed away would have been Seven Psychopaths. He plays a very small role in that, but very memorable role. Love that movie. So it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, Harry Dean Stanton, we miss him, we love him, but the man left behind a vast body of work for us to admire and look over for years to come.
Absolutely wonderful. And then one last small character that we don't see that much with, but William Ostrander as Buddy Repperton, which, I mean, perfect dynamic between him and Arnie and Dennis. You really hate him, but it's like he just has this charisma about him, I guess, that you would love to see the inner workings of this character and the workings of his gang, because it all adds, again, very Stephen King-esque trope, I think. But it feels so fun and so natural to the story. Even though he looks like he's about 45 in high school, but I mean, what can you do?
Yeah, right. He does look like an old man. I definitely dig his performance here. And it's one of those things where it's like, I think I'll always look at him synonymously with this film. For some reason, and this is very weird because he's not even the one to do this, but that scene where he's harassing Arnie in shop class, and his buddy, what's his name? He's the one that gets cut in half by the car. Moochie grabs fucking Dennis's nuts and grabs it. Like, dude, like, it's just so fucking painful. Don't sit there and like change it from what it is. I'm just saying that's like, what a low blow, you know what I mean? Like, he just grabs him by the cojones.
No, and that's what I was going with too. Fuck, I mean, like, who does that? And then he's like, "How do you like that, dick face?" And I'm like, Jesus, man, what are we doing here? This is like, wild. This is on another level of brutality.
Yeah, no, definitely rough. I gotta say, I didn't sympathize too much for Moochie there, but yes, getting back to the actual actor, fantastic. Buddy's a great villain, great side character villain, and always
you love to hate him.
You do, yes, and he does have that kind of charisma to him that you always enjoy watching, and then when he gets his comeuppance, it's one of the most memorable sequences in the film.
Absolutely. Well,
all right,
that rounds us out for the cast there.
Absolutely. So why don't we move on to our next segment that we so deemed Creatures Features.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Absolutely. Love that sequence, of course. Always talking about it. I always talk up our little transitions. I feel like I have to because they just get me so excited. But yeah, so with this film, you'd be surprised, quite a bit of special effects going on here. So, it's one of those things where it's like, we could talk about how they did it. I think one of the biggest undertakings that we have to discuss when it comes to this film is just how they pulled off some of the effects with Christine. Now, Luke, do you have anything for us there? Because I have a couple of notes that I could rattle off, but if you have something better, go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, so I do have that Roy Arbogast was the special effects supervisor, which he's joining back with John Carpenter right after The Thing here. So it's, interesting to see that these two are still working together, especially after the negative connotation at this point that The Thing had going for it, But again, we look at the effects of The Thing, and I mean, they are timeless now. So it's like it makes sense that that he's back here because it's like I think the effects a lot of times work here, and like you said, you'd be surprised at how much is going actually into this film because it's looking at it. I've heard varying to a varying degree. I don't know if you heard any different. Where it's like I've heard. I think Carpenter himself on the commentary said around 23 Plymouth Furies were on set. I've heard 24. I've also heard 28. So there is like this varying degree of how many different versions of the Plymouth Furies. And of course, most of them weren't actual Plymouth Furies. They had to kind of almost piece and part them all out and make their versions of them as accurate as possible because this was such a huge undertaking here. And I can't remember, I think there is statistics, I did not write it down, about how much like the percentage of the budget went just for cars here because they were wrecking them. They all already had their issues. So it was like the cars alone that were portraying one car in this film, it was a bit of an undertaking in itself.
Yeah, and what I've found over here is it's not a specific number, but it does say that 15% of the budget was spent on cars
There we
alone
go.
for this film. All but two were destroyed, and one of those was actually sold in 2004 for $167,000. One of the on-screen used Plymouth Furies. So very cool stuff there. But yeah, I think that it's super impressive what they're able to do with this. Like I said, the car when it rebuilds itself is an impressive feat in and of itself. But then again, also when the car rolls in smoldering, when the car is on fire, they really do stretch the imagination of what this beast can do. Everything, even up until the end, when the car is being smashed by the bulldozer, and you're watching it get crushed up, and then slowly kind of brought to just like it's slow death essentially is what I'm trying to get at here, where it's just like you were watching this thing fall apart and ever so slightly. It's really impressive stuff here.
Yeah, and just the idea here, as we had talked about that show me scene earlier on in the film, and John Carpenter, that was initially filmed without, there was no actual transformation scene or regeneration scene. It all happened off screen, and John Carpenter just felt there was something missing there. So they all got together and decided that they had to find a way to actually film a regeneration scene there. So it's like, and looking at it, I believe they used hydraulics to almost suck in the pieces of the car and then just played it in reverse to look like it was kind of, all coming back together. So, the basic camera tricks that they used, they said it wasn't like a very new technique. It was just something that they had picked up along the way. But like that effect, again, is such a centerpiece in this film. I can't imagine that happening off screen and then just seeing. I mean, we talked about Keith Gordon. He plays it off so well, but getting those close-ups of the car kind of fixing itself, it's so memorable. I think those are the things that everyone still talks about. I mean, I think Carpenter himself had said he's asked about that scene so many times by fans because it is such an iconic. And I remember watching this for the first time. I'm like, how the hell did they do that? It's just like one of those that you're dumbfounded at watching.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. It is mind-boggling to think that this is all practical and how they were able to pull it off. I can only imagine how they butcher it today with CG.
My
Like just
gosh.
how it would just look so twisted and fake and horrible. Like gosh. But yeah, I mean, like they put this car, these 58 Plymouth Furies. That's a tongue twister. Through hell. But I mean, it's all in service of the film, and I think like every effect shot they use it for is quite impressive. And yeah, I gotta say it's quite awesome to kind of see what they're able to accomplish. And really, it's not like they use it all that much. Like there's not a ton of visual effects in here, but when they do use it, it counts. So it's not like The Thing where there's visual effects sprawled throughout the entire film. It's only a few key scenes, but it's like I said, when they do use it, believe me, it counts. It looks great.
Yes, absolutely. And it's like one of those. I know they had a couple things that did not really work out. I know they had wanted to do. I think there are photos out there of they had attached the front of a Plymouth Fury onto like a freight truck, and had Keith Gordon and John Stockwell delivering their lines of when he's drinking beer and picks him up, and saying you got to feed love and all this other stuff. They wanted it to be very illuminated, almost like daylight, because Christine's lights were so bright, and so they were barreling down this highway. Trying to deliver their lines, but they said the engines to light everything up were, I think they said like jet engines, airplane engines, or something to
Too
give
loud.
enough light. And it's like they were so loud that they're basically screaming their lines. And Keith Gordon makes a joke about like, we're attached to the front of this freight truck and we have nothing underneath us. So he's like, if this gives out, we're getting hit by this freight truck that's behind us, and there's nothing underneath us that's going to be catching us. So he's like trying to deliver his lines. He can't hear anything, and he's hoping to not die. So it's like he said he was thankful they filmed that, but then they decided after reviewing the footage that they just did they just did it in studio, moving the car with the simple tricks, and you just decided it's all interior, So it's like I think they had a great vision there where overall they knew what was in their wheelhouse. They knew what was going to work and what wasn't. So it's like they were able to say, okay, we need the special effect here. And then this other special effect, it's just too much. So let's just go with the bare bones and the basics here. And I think that's why this film turns out so well, is that there are so many great yes, a lot of special effects when it comes to Christine, but other than that, there isn't a ton of wild things going on here. And I think that's where you're allowed to lose yourself in the story, but also love the horror and the science fiction elements.
I agree. Alrighty. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up here for our special effects section. So why don't we bring it on home with our final segment, which we used to like to call The Check is in the Mail.
Just listen to the old Pork Chop Express and take his advice on a dark and stormy night, all right? When some wild-eyed 8-foot-tall maniac grabs your neck, taps the back of your favorite head up against a barroom wall, and he looks you crooked in the eye, and he asks you if you've paid your dues, well, you just stare that big sucker right back in the eye, and you remember what old Jack Burton always says at a time like that. Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir, the check is in the mail.
Alrighty, and yeah, I guess it works. So we conclude with another Carpenter classic to kind of pull us out. Yeah, man, Christine. Easy to say, the legacy of this film. It lives on. I mean, this is one of those
Absolutely.
ones that I was surprised initially when this was announced so early on to be getting a 4K release a few years ago. But now owning it and seeing it more frequently and keeping it in my rotation a little more often, it's easy to see why. I think that
Yes.
it's a very underrated tour de force, filmmaking, writing, just bring it all home as far as the presentation and the acting. It's all there, man. It's a very complete movie. It's a movie you can learn from. If you are into filmmaking or just into this in general, but it's also a film that you can enjoy, and it's a timeless kind of holidayless horror. in the sense of like, we talk about, films that we like to watch at certain times of the year. I mean, of course, we'll watch all the stuff we want. Like we were talking Die Hard before this, or it's one of those rare films. You can watch that at Christmas and it's a Christmas movie. You can watch that, in the middle of July and it still works. This is one of those films where it's like, you can watch this any time of the year and it's going to feel good. It's going to work. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's a film that you can have so much fun with. Like you were saying, this wasn't necessarily ever shown on Halloween. I mean, we watch Halloween outside of Halloween, but it's like, this wasn't not necessarily in those Halloween movie marathons where it doesn't scream that. Because I think that is kind of goes to the quality of the storytelling here, where we're not overtly telling too much horror tones here, where they're there. But again, this could be qualified as a monster movie. This could be a love story, science fiction, horror elements. I mean, there's an intertwining. It's a perfect melody of destruction, I feel. So it's one of those things where you can have fun with this film. You can flip it on. I've fallen asleep to Christine very many times, just turning it on and listening to some of the dialogue. It's a comfort movie for me, I think. Just the visuals, the cinematography here is beautiful. The dialogue is something where it's like you never look at it and say, that doesn't feel genuine. I think all the performances, all the interactions between the characters, everything feels genuine and real. And it's something where you could spend a day with these guys. You know what I mean? Where it's like you don't feel like you would be annoyed there. I would love to hang out with Arnie and Dennis. I'd ride shotgun even if Arnie's drinking beers. So I think it's a lot of fun. It's a film that I've revisited many times. I'll revisit many times after this. It's one of those things where, I'm going to speak it in the universe now, since this film is near and dear to our friendship and this podcast. I think when we're talking about commentaries, this one should be at the forefront because it is fun to kind of pick each part of dialogue, scenes. There's so much here to describe. I mean, we're going almost 2 hours. There's still a handful of things I would still love to touch on that we just didn't quite fit into this podcast. So a great film. I know there's been remake news. For me, I hope it doesn't happen. Like you said, with the CGI and stuff, I don't trust it. I think the practical is what we needed, and it's what we got. I think John Carpenter was a perfect person to bring this to film. Stephen King, the source material, very strong as well, even though I haven't read it. The tones that we do get seem phenomenal. Really eager to crack this one open. We'll see what we get. But, if this film stays in 1983, I am absolutely okay with it.
I agree with you there, but I want to throw one thing to you. What if Mike Flanagan, was announced as a director here? Considering the fact that he's already worked with a lot of Stephen King properties. I know you're not the biggest fan of Dr. Sleep, but I know you like a lot of his other work. Would that give you a little bit more interest, you think?
I don't think so, unfortunately. When you throw out Mike Flanagan, I only have Dr. Sleep as the comparison. And for me, Dr. Sleep seems a little too bloated for my taste, where there's a lot of things where Flanagan tried to take every little bit of the Dr. Sleep novel and try and fit it in to the filmmaking. Whereas like looking at Christine and John Carpenter and Ben Phillips, where they kind of stripped everything away and rebuilt it to one more so streamlined story. So I don't know if Mike Flanagan for me would be the person to tell this story. I would, if he did, it would have to be a more a bare bones approach. So if I'm comparing it to Dr. Sleep, I don't know if this would be the right guy. I feel like he would be too interested in pleasing the source material for Stephen King rather than trying to take out big chunks of the story and then connect the dots. I mean, if he was announced, would I go see it? Absolutely. My trepidation here is more so with the practical effects. But you give this to Mike Flanagan in, again, a limited series. Give me 10 episodes, then I think he's the right guy to do it.
That would have been my follow-up question, is like, so if it's not a movie but a series, does that make you feel better? So I guess that answers that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that overall a remake is unnecessary for this. Again, if you were to do it, then definitely lean into more of a series than a film. lean into the kind of American Werewolf stuff that you guys were talking about, where it's like, you get that whole, I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, that would be riding shotgun with Arnie, lean into that stuff.
Roland
So that
LeBay?
Roland LeBay, yeah, lean into that a little bit more, give us more, play with that to kind of set the story apart. And it could work, but do we need it? No. Do I think there's other Stephen King properties that you could remake or even bring to the screen? Yes. I think we should focus on those first before we start remaking classics that are beloved.
And that's where it's like, looking at Christine, John Carpenter and Ben Phillips have fulfilled my taste in terms of how I think this should be balanced with horror and great storytelling and tension. So this is my kind of movie. If we're going to remake this film, I say let's try to go to a balls to the wall version. Let's lean more into the horror, and then let's bring in Roland LeBay. Let's see what that looks like. So if we're going to do it, maybe we do it like that just to give a variation between Christine's. Could it turn out horrible? Absolutely. But at least it might be different. I don't know.
I agree with you there. But alrighty, I guess that's going to bring us to the end of our podcast on Christine. Definitely enjoyed talking about this one. This was a whole lot of fun. I always enjoy talking Carpenter. Clearly, we have a lot to say.
Absolutely.
And, I think that, of course, like Luke said, we will be bringing this to a commentary at some point down the road here. We are getting into the colder months here for us over here in Ohio. So there will be a lot more of an opportunity for us to kind of sit down and just enjoy the indoors a little bit and actually be able to do this. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we'll be able to sit down with you guys. We want to do more live shows. We want to definitely bring more classic films up to watch. We've had a lot of fun with things like Terrifier and The Black Phone, but we had a great time with Halloween 4. I think this would fit really well into that lineup. And I think we could definitely expect a little bit more of that. But yeah, other than that, we'll talk about some things coming up on the show here. But first, don't forget to follow us on our social media at SplatterCast Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can keep up with all us there for the latest and greatest, as well as, just like we said earlier in this episode, we did cross 500 subscribers. So thank you very much, guys, for that. That is awesome. We're happy that you love our content. We are hoping to now make our way quickly up to 1K. That would be insane. It would be great to do that before our 1 year, which I believe is in May. If I remember correctly, I think that's when we posted our first video. I can double check that real quick. But nonetheless, this is a great monumental moment for us. Like we said, we've, had a few iterations of this. We've never really hit the ground running as hard as we did here before. And it's really great to finally see, this kind of panning out for us and really people responding to it. It's taken a lot of hard work, but I gotta say, I'm happy to do it. I'm enjoying my time. So yeah, exactly 6 months from 6 months ago, May 9th is our year when we'll be hitting our year of our first post. So if you guys could get us to 1,000 before May 9th, or at least at May 9th, I mean, I'd be absolutely blown away.
Oh my god.
So if you got any, go ahead.
Oh no, it would be terrific if we got there. I mean, we're gonna lead that charge into 2023. I mean, a lot of great stuff lined up for you. We're revisiting the format a little bit. Kind of, we have a lot of things planned that we really have been wanting to get to. So I mean, the channel's gonna be growing here in 2023 with a lot of things you've seen, some things you haven't seen, and a lot of new things we're going to be bringing here. So we're leading that charge to 1,000. What an accomplishment 500 is. So, I'm going to ride that high for at least this whole week and look back as, when we started this incarnation here in May, we weren't sure where it was going to lead. We just knew we wanted to be consistent, and we wanted this platform because me and Dylan found so many times that we were just talking on the phone about things we had been watching, old and new. And it was like, we had that appetite to sit down and talk in long form for this stuff. And we're glad that you guys are showing up to watch it, comments, and give us all that feedback. So we greatly appreciate it. I can't wait to see what 2023 holds for us.
Absolutely. But other than that, you guys can keep an eye out for more content coming to you this week. We are going to be checking out the Mean One. We were able to acquire tickets, so we'll be seeing that on the 8th and getting your review out on the 8th. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. And then, of course, we're going to have a review of Christmas, Bloody Christmas, the new Joe Bagos film. Very interested to see how that one pans out. And then, of course, like we posted yesterday, we are in December to Dismember starting on the 14th. So we'll have a lot of great stuff going through the entirety of the Silent Night, Deadly Night series, as well as potential live stream for the film. I know I put it in the thumbnail there. We may be covering Jack Frost. So that's a good bit of fun. Just a lot of slaughter, a lot of Christmas joy, fun, and cheer. I'm really looking forward to all of that, and it's going to be a blast, leading us out of 2022 and into 2023.
What a fun time it's going to be. I'm already hyped up for the holiday season. I cannot wait to officially start December to Dismember, because it is going to be a great deal of fun.
Yes, and I got to give credit where credit is due. That is actually, we were probably going to do something for Christmas. We didn't really cover it too much, but Luke was actually the brainchild behind December to Dismember. That was his title. He was the one that said we should probably do something a little bit more for the Christmas season because we love our holiday horror. So pat yourself on the back there, Luke. That's all you. So can't wait to see how this one pans out.
Yes, and I'll say, yeah, I did coin the phrase and everything, but Dylan did come up with the nifty video and logo, which he always does with a lot of these things. So pat yourself on the back there, sir, as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. But yeah, we'll be definitely advertising that. Like I said, that's going to start up on the 14th, where we'll be going through the Silent Night, Deadly Night series. Pretty much we're looking to get you guys a video every other day when that starts. So definitely keep up on that. It's not going to be as crazy as Splatterthon is. I mean, that's Halloween, that's October, that's our month. So, we always go hard for that. But this is definitely going to be like kind of Splatterthon light in a sense. We're going to have a lot of fun stuff. We're definitely going to keep up with that. We really saw you guys responded to our Halloween series. So hopefully the Silent Night, Deadly Night series will get in there for you guys pretty good. And I think it's a perfect year to do it because they just had the later films, 3, 4, and 5, all were released on Blu-ray recently, which has never happened. So that's very cool. So, and they're all available on Shudder.
Yes, and they have been a gap in both of our kind of filmography in terms of watching these things. So we're crossing those off now here in December. What a time it is. So I'm very intrigued to see if I like these enough. I'd love to pick up that copy of that Blu-ray.
I don't know, man. I think they're going to be interesting. I was cutting together that promo. I pulled a couple of them. Their trailers, just from what I could find, and we were looking kind of rough. But hey, I'm excited to check them out nonetheless. So yeah, other than that, guys, that's I think gonna wrap us up here. So Luke, you got anything left for him?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. Just stay tuned. A lot coming your way.
Absolutely. So thank you guys again. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you join the family here. And yeah, if you guys know anybody who is into horror and they aren't aware of us yet, please shout us out. Let them know that we exist, because I'm sure they'll love our content as well. At least we hope. But other than that, I guess that wraps us up. So until next time, I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And always remember, what am I doing? Oh my God, that was almost perfect. I almost did the please silence your cell phones. That was our old by admission one. Yeah, right. But no, let me re-rack that real quick here. Always remember, stay scared.